Dr. Klinghardt studied medicine and psychology in Germany, completing his PhD on the involvement of the autonomic nervous system in autoimmune disorders. Early in his career, he became interested in the health consequences of chronic toxicity. He has contributed significantly to the understanding of metal toxicity and its connection with chronic infections, illness, and pain. He's been instrumental in advancing various fields within the biological medicine world. And if I read everything that this man has accomplished, I would take up all of his time. He founded Sophia Health Institute and is actively involved in patient care at his clinic. I was fortunate to hear Dr. Klinghardt speak at Autism One last May. He was talking about retroviruses and other things that impact the health of my family. And I was sitting in the audience with tears streaming down my face because it resonated so much with me. So I'm thrilled that he's here today. Thank you very much, Dr. Klinghardt. Come on up and we'll learn some more from you.
Just briefly, I do have a practice on the outskirts of Seattle where I actually suffer through seeing patients every day. So I'm not just talking. My practice, about a third of the patients I see are autistic children, which is a heartbreaking part of my job. And then 1/3 is normal people that are ill, and 1/3 is rich people that help me pay for the people that can't pay. So that's sort of just to put that off my chest. So I put it here, the art and science of how to disable our immune system so we cannot stay well or regain health when we already lost it. So that's a little bit, I'm from Berlin and we have a strange sense of humor. We broke down, this is like 30 years ago, what makes us ill into 7 things that we should consider when somebody is chronically ill. The first one is the structural imbalances. And we actually, in chronically ill people, we look a lot at the bite and the teeth. So I started working with a clinic in Switzerland because the dentistry over there is far more advanced than what we have here. Simply better instruments that are not FDA approved here, better materials like dental filling materials that are bisphenol A free, whereas all the ones available in the US have bisphenol A in it, which is a hormone mimic. And so we have people remove all the root canals. We, of course, the amalgam mouths need to be metal free, because metals in the mouth are microwave receivers and they concentrate the cell phone radiation into your brain, into your nervous system. Anyway, so we do a lot with the teeth, and then always the last step is to balance the bite, which is really the hard part of this. And then all of you are familiar with the biochemical needs that people have. That's a popular thing in the US, where the US is kind of the only place where we advanced in the world is the biochemistry, the use of vitamins and herbs and nutritional things to balance the system. But there's only one of 7 things. We're leaving out 6 others that are equally important. Toxicity, of course, is a huge issue. Just a little bit statistics. There's a brilliant German researcher, Richard Strauber, who works with apheresis. He developed an instrument that basically washes all the toxins out of your blood, and then they're in that concentrate called Eluat, at the concentration where you can actually detect them with very simple tools. And using the same test 10 years ago, he found on average 20 toxins above a certain threshold in the human cell, and the average of his patients. And now he completed a review of 1,350 patients, and that number has gone up from 20 toxins to over 500 in just 10 years. So these numbers will be published, and I will be the first person to get those publications. There's been a huge rise in chronic illness, and it goes exponentially. The numbers of autistic children double every 5 years statistically, even though we flatten out the curve by taking people off the spectrum and calling it something else. There is now over 30 different adjacent diagnoses, so it looks like the numbers of autism are not increasing. No, this is the last PowerPoint of the last person. And so there's two things that we're looking at. One is the lifespan, and one is the health span. The health span is defined as the years where we're living independent, we're able to make money, and we live off drugs and off artificial joints. And that number has dramatically decreased in just the last 20 years. It's shocking when you see those numbers, and actually I'm totally with Tom, I don't think that the Earth is dying personally, but certainly the conditions that have made higher life possible, the life of the mammals and the higher evolved species, the conditions get less and less likely to favor our survival. And we're much closer to an end point if we're not changing the way we're doing it. There's a statistics that was just released in Germany. If every human being on the planet right now would have the lifestyle of the average German to support that, we would need 3 Earths to support that. This is just one small country with less than 80 million people. If everybody would have the same lifestyle, which means a car, a house, a little bit of a garden, we would need 3 Earths to feed that. The gasoline used, the air breathed, the food used. Biophysical stress is the biggest other factor other than the toxins in the last 20 years. There's been a rise in exposure to microwave from the cell phone radiation by a factor of several million times the exposure increase, and I get a little bit more into that. And then, yes, allergies. Allergies are simply an indicator that we've lost immune tolerance. We call that, and that of course brings us right to the vaccines, which I will mention. And then there is the energetic perturbances, we call it. I'm not going to go deep into that, but any scar that you have from a surgery, but also any emotional scar that you have, will set loops in the nervous system in action that are working against your health, and there's ways of finding that out. And then of course there's all the psychospiritual issues. Now I do want to say, even though I studied psychology after medical school, because I was hoping to find a solution for myself there, and I actually found out years later I had Lyme disease since I was 12 years old, and there was nothing major psychologically wrong with me, even though I have some friends that believe I do. But in general, the media and the television and all, they're all cooperating right now with what's going wrong in the world. The support that they give, the uncensored, completely unscientific support of the vaccine push that comes through the media and through television and through the outlets. And they always using it. You had the stress that you all have that's caused by your family life and by your job, and so it's maybe 5% of it. The real stresses that we have are the invisible ones, the toxins in us and the electrosmog that we're exposed to. I'm just, some of you know I use a lot of muscle testing, and I refined the skill. We did some peer-reviewed studies now on it and could show that we have statistically high correlation with what we find with objective testing. And so we were able to actually eliminate most of the lab testing and the expensive part of medicine, and just use everything with muscle testing. I did a beautiful study with a famous radiologist, where we could show when we, with muscle testing, find, for example, that your thyroid is not in order, that we could use ultrasound and confirm that, yes, even with ultrasound, you could show the same thing. But, and then there's other things, like one thing, we can diagnose infections when all the, like in this case, all the conventional lab work was negative, and with muscle testing, we could show the patient very well had Lyme disease and Babesia and Bartonella, and then we developed a special testing procedure by putting ultrasound on the organs that are affected to shake the bugs out of the organ into the bloodstream, and then we could find it in the pee. And this is sort of one of the things that we published in a peer-reviewed journal. So I'm not going to hack on this. Like the organization, I'm happy to give you the PowerPoint, and so there is a lot of things in here that you may want to review. Also, some literature sites are coming here. So I want you to be able to use this material to go to battle with it. Andy already went through a lot of stuff. You know, we always start with our patient to clean up the home. And the first thing is to shut the damn Wi-Fi off. You know, I did a study that I could never get published on autism. That was about 15 years ago, 12 years ago, where we went back to the home of moms that had given birth to a child that later became autistic or was diagnosed with autism. We went back to the sleeping location, reconstructed what she had in terms of cordless phones and Wi-Fi router, and found that the moms that gave birth to an autistic child were exposed to over 20 times the Wi-Fi radiation while they were pregnant compared to the moms that gave birth to healthy children. And with that, that is the most proven factor. If you want to have an autistic child, you know, have the Wi-Fi router close by and you know, sleep with it on. That's a guarantee that your kid will be at least hyperactive later, or at least will be behaviorally disturbed. If you really want that, keep the thing on. But if you don't want it, a simple way to start, there's other things we do for protection, so shut the Wi-Fi off at least when you're not using it. Home mold, and you went over that. And then decreasing your toxic load. I will focus a bit today on aluminum, and less on the other things. Glyphosate we talked about. By the way, Restore is a great way of decreasing glyphosate. There's a beautiful chicken study, you know, where they made chicken toxic with glyphosate. It was in the liver and the brain, and they looked through thousands of compounds to see what would pull it out. And it was humic acid and fulvic acid. That's the high moors, you know, the lakes by the mountains that have all the black water in it. These are fermented trees and plants, and the concentrate of that is very high in humic acid, fulvic acid, and thousands of other things. And when you give that, at least to chicken, it pulls all the glyphosate out. So we give it to people as a supplement from BioPure. It's a local company that's called Matrix Minerals, that is a concentrate of that. Restore has a lot of it in it as well. This is a little bit on the glyphosate. And we give glycine, and we give the peat extract. And then the big one of our time is, of course, how to deal with pathogens. You know, we all agreed years ago, you know, I set out on a journey to develop a Lyme treatment that does not require the use of antibiotics. And so I call myself proudly the last, even though I'm a medical doctor, I call myself the last naturopath in Seattle, yeah, because all my naturopathic colleagues, including Bastyr College, went to using antibiotics to kill, which is not the way to go, you know. And so we developed an herbal approach with liposomal herbs that's absolutely beautiful. So yes, and then eventually, with the pathogens we found, it's not just Lyme disease and mold, there's something deeper going on. I will get into that in this talk. It's the retroviruses and the prion disease. And then in terms of psychotherapy, it's absolutely important. Health is really a construct, you know. Your nutrition is a big part of it. Your partnership, your social environment is a big part of it. Your finances are a big part of your health. And a big part of your health is the electrosmog exposure that you have. And about half of this whole pie is your psychology. You know, I say half jokingly but half seriously that chronic illness is a bad habit of the brain. Why? Because the brain is a absolute fantastic pharmaceutical industry that can produce any chemical that makes you either ill or well. It can antidote any illness that you have with the incredible manufacturing process that's going on. And plus, the brain is by far the best frequency generator. You do not need a Rife machine. the brain can generate any frequency that will actually make your system an uncomfortable place for any microbe. It just has to generate it, and to release that, you have to work psychologically. You have to clean up your personal biography and go beyond that, your family biography. You know, these are huge things that we learn how to put that into action. So a little bit about toxins. So we all know that the MMR vaccine now contains aluminum. I was involved very much in the battle in the 90s to remove mercury from the vaccines, and we thought we won the battle when the College of Pediatrics recommended to take mercury out of the vaccines. And what did they do? They replaced it with nanonized aluminum. Turns out there was never a safety study done on it, never anything done on it. And also turns out there's still traces of mercury in all the vaccines. So they just lowered it, but they didn't take it out. And so Stephanie Seneff, again, her name comes up all the time. She's a friend and mentor, you know. So it is important to know that amongst all the toxins that are in the world, aluminum is now taken number one in terms of co-creating really all the neurological illnesses. And here's a beautiful study done by a friend of ours, Chris Exley really is the author of it. He is a professor in England and a friend. And so he examined, children with autism have a much higher rate of death. And so he got 20 brains of autistic children that died, examined them for the aluminum content, or for the content of different toxins. And he found that the aluminum content of their brains was 20 to 40 times higher than the brains of other children. And where does the aluminum come from? Well, we know one of them is an insane vaccine schedule that we have, which leads to doses of aluminum by the time they're 2 years old that would kill an elephant if you would inject it into an elephant. And so, but the other one, the silent one, is this one, is the geoengineering program that's been going on for the last 15 years, very, very intensively. It's sprayed against the sky, with the purpose of cooling or deflecting the sunlight to cooling what's underneath. It turns out it's abused for military purposes. This is the sky over Berlin, and we have one of the high-ranking people from Boeing involved in constructing the tanks for the planes. And he says, smiling to me, how do you think we were able to listen to Angela Merkel's telephone conversations? She's the German chancellor, and it's known, there was the scandal that the CIA had all the recordings of every phone call she's ever made. And so he joked and said, how do you think we managed to listen to her phone? We needed to put a metal cover on the sky over her so that deflects her phone calls so we could read them. And so this is going on all over the world, 42 countries, and the West Coast is especially affected by it. And so this is, I think, a picture that says more than 1,000 words. The Earth in the year 2000 and in the year 2015. Something happened to the color when you look out from space towards the Earth. And a large part of that is nanonized aluminum. And guess where that goes? Does aluminum stay in the air? Well, it's on little plastic beads, that float for a while, and then it comes down, needs to be sprayed again. And so the other big boo-boo is the Wi-Fi environment. And here's so far the best study from the University of Athens that shows that 1/7 of our proteins in the body are permanently dysregulated. 1/7, Zach gave a good number today. We have over 200,000 different proteins that regulate everything that makes us human, and 1/7 of that is dysregulated by the exposure to what we have right now. Now we go from 3G to 5G. Nobody knows what that is doing, because nobody had a chance to evaluate it. It's either going to be a lot better or a lot worse. And of course, so far, nothing has happened in the change of technology that went from worse to better. It always went from worse to even worse than that. So the thing that I'm passionate about over these years. So there's three things in the vaccines that shouldn't be in there. One is toxins, and I'll show you some studies. And actually, I have attached to my memory stick, give it to the organizers here, 2 studies that are revolutionary on the vaccine issue. One is the first cohort study, one group of children vaccinated and one comparable group not vaccinated. Guess what? Well, the vaccinated group, 14 times more severe lifelong allergies and significantly more neurological illness compared to this group. Try to Google it, you won't find it. The other study, the beautiful Italian study where they looked at nanocontaminants in the vaccines and found pretty much every toxic metal in there that you could ever imagine. And of course, by bypassing the regular routes, it stays in the body forever, and metals have an affinity for the brain, and so they end up in the brain. And the third one in the vaccines is the DNA. The vaccines, most of them are grown now on human DNA from aborted fetuses. And when you implant foreign DNA in your body, if you get a heart transplant or a kidney transplant, you have to take rejection drugs for the rest of your life to not have severe rejection reactions or autoimmunity that rises from that. Well, what are you given after the vaccines? Are you given rejection drugs for the rest of your life? You should, but if you don't, unpredictable things happen from your immune system. I consider myself an expert because I did my thesis on it. I was admittedly 1974, it's a while ago. So the other thing in the vaccines are retroviruses, and they're all full of it now. They didn't used to have them in it. There's a discussion whether they're in there as a byproduct of the unmonitored of making them, because the American government passed a law in the 90s when there was a vaccine shortage that the vaccine manufacturers are exempt from any responsibility for damages that happen. And so it's gung-ho, like whatever they put in there. But there is the sinister thought that the retroviruses may be added in purposefully to achieve other goals. In Africa they found substances in the vaccines that Bill Gates was promoting that sterilize women. So that's been used for that on millions of people in Africa. And we don't really know why the retroviruses are in us. So I want to educate you a little bit on what retroviruses are, what they do. So there's 2 groups of retroviruses. There's hundreds of them. Yes, and Zach said, some of them are good for us. Some of them, plants and humans have been exposed throughout our evolution through these viruses. The strange creatures, they're called retroviruses because when they enter our system, they enter the cell, and they attach themselves to the RNA. Usually RNA reads the DNA and then travels into the cell to a manufacturing plant, the ribosomes, where they then gather amino acids and produce a protein. So it's usually the direction goes from DNA to outward. And the retroviruses attach themselves to the RNA, induce an enzyme that's called reverse transcriptase, and they make the RNA move backwards and take the retrovirus into the DNA and embed it there. And they stay there for life. And the body has to shut them down. And that is through the known mechanism through methylation. That's where the big methylation work comes in, that many of the autistic moms hear to ad nauseum. Everything is methylation, it's important. But there's also the histone modification and acetylation. There's like 3 basic processes by which we can shut down segments embedded in our DNA that we shouldn't have. And just to give it some numbers, only 2% of our DNA is what most of us physicians have learned. We learned DNA is a program for manufacturing proteins. That's only 2% of the DNA. 98% used to be called junk DNA. Now it turns out they all have regulatory function on those 2%. But 8% of the DNA is these retroviruses. And if you wrap them around the Earth, like if you take every cell and take the retroviral DNA alone and wrap it around the Earth, 150,000 times. That's how long it is. And that's a busy job to shut that down, to keep that under control. And so we need to know that retrovirus have three sources. One is we're born with them from our mom and dad. The DNA contains them. And for millions of years in our evolution, we've been able to shut them down. And it's very clear that the combined exposure to glyphosate has been shown to disable the mechanism that we need to shut it down. Electrosmog, the exposure to Wi-Fi, has been shown to disable the very mechanisms to shut them down. And so we've created a monster in this world. And so what do retroviruses do? We get to that, So the ones embedded in our DNA are called human endogenous retroviruses, but you can also get retroviruses from the outside. The most famous one is HIV. There's still some discussion, but that it really exists as a single retrovirus, or if it's actually a group of retroviruses, it doesn't really matter. And then there is the viruses actually in insects. So we've learned, consider myself, I wrote a textbook on Lyme disease a few years ago, considered myself one of the world experts on it. And we found there's two people with Lyme disease. There's the ones that never know they have an illness because they do well, and the ones that are completely crippled by it. And the difference is the activity of the retroviruses. It has nothing to do with the bacterial component of it. So just take my word for it for now. So I'm going to skip a few things. You can all look this up if you want. So retroviruses and vaccines, I just highlight here one of the first articles. The data indicate the systemic presence of partially particle-associated retroviral reverse transcriptase in attenuated live virus vaccines. That was 1996. Systemic presence, that means I found in all the vaccines, not just in some. There's some of the papers down here, and I want to highlight the first two of this are these two groups of children that were compared, that I mentioned before, that shows a combined incidence of 14 times more severe allergies. You cannot Google this one. I get into that in a moment, because Google is firmly in the hands of the people that are organizing the geoengineering and the chemtrails and are pushing the glyphosate on the fields. There is one hand behind all that, and so, and then here's a beautiful author who's local, Teresa Deischer. I don't know if she's in the room or not, but she should be. She's absolutely brilliant. And here is the beautiful article she wrote on the relationship between vaccines and the way they're manufactured and autism. So I'm personally not against vaccine. Vaccines are abused right now in the purpose of something else. There's absolutely no question. So here's some of her publications that shows the incidence of autism in relationship to the introduction of the different vaccines. And you see these funny upward bends when a new vaccine was introduced. And so now, skipping forward came out 2 years ago, the DNA issue. I mentioned that the human fetal DNA is used to grow the vaccines on, and there is absolutely no question that by inserting the foreign DNA into the body, that triggers autoimmunity later on with a delay of 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is. That's why it's very difficult to also prove the connection between a particular vaccine and the incidence of autism, But the fact that the Amish population that doesn't vaccinate has virtually zero rate of autism suggests a lot, that you don't have to be intelligent to make that link. So this is a fantastic study done by somebody locally. This is the same Mrs. Deicher. I wished I would meet her at some point, but she should be part of this group. She is? Okay. So I'm just showing like the two latest study. One is actually in Nature, which is one of the highest ranked medical journals, on the study that we heard about earlier from Tom, on the Infanrix Hexa, that's the vaccine, where they actually didn't find the antigens against the vaccine in there at all, just the contaminants. Yeah. So what's the purpose of putting contaminants in you without the actual vaccine? Yeah. That's I put a question here. I'm a scientist, so I'm looking at those data and saying, a good study. I went forth and back and kind of looked at the credible. They did the right procedures. Couldn't find the actual antigens in there. And so the other one, the Corveva study from Italy, fantastic study. The first study that she did looked at the contaminants, and I found radioactive uranium, plutonium in there. They found, things you let in there, glyphosate, as I said, human fetal DNA, and retroviruses. That sort of has become my passion, because I think that has changed the life of many of my autistic children when we treat them for the retroviruses. And it's a long story with that the only lab in the US that could actually, where we could send blood to, that gave us a diagnosis, was violently shut down. That's documented in the book called Plague. That's a must read for most of you. Judy Mikovits, who was the leading researcher that we were in contact with, where we could just send the blood of the autistic kids and people with Alzheimer's. Also people with, when people started having complaints, their brain not working right, like some of you know, you have that. We sent their blood in, and pretty much all of them were positive for retroviruses. So the way the government dealt with it, well, let's shut down the lab so there's no more problem. That's a very German solution, really, to problems. So just look at the sentence down here from this study. Vaccines manufactured in human fetal cell lines contain unacceptably high levels of fetal DNA fragment contaminants. So how about being a vegan, getting a vaccine with human DNA in it? Or how about even just being a Christian and getting a vaccine, with human DNA in it? How about if you're against abortions and you actually get the DNA from aborted fetuses? Shouldn't you speak up? Shouldn't? And I just pose a question here. Where the fuck is the Christian church in this? I had a pastor on one of the mega churches here, was one of my patients, and he gave a sermon with 8,000 people, like something. I said, listen, let me talk to your congregation, and I have some things to say. He had a serious illness, and he smiled at me and said, listen, I'm so dependent on the sponsors. The cell phone industry is sponsoring me. The farming chemical industry is sponsoring me. I can't say the truth. That was the end for me. That was the last sermon I went to. Now, admittedly, also insects. I mentioned that Lyme disease is known to be conferred to you by biting insects, not just ticks, but also spiders, fleas, and mites. But all of them also contain retroviruses. And so I'm going to skip forward a little bit. You can get the PowerPoint if you want. So cat fleas are notorious. When you have a cat, you have Bartonella. There is almost no way out. If the cat is allowed to go outside, you have Bartonella, but you don't only have Bartonella, you also have retroviruses, because cat fleas are known to harbor those things. And retroviruses, I'll show you in a moment what they're causing when they're out of control. So here's a list of this literature sites. So ADHD in young children, increasingly common now. One of the major causes is activity of retroviruses in the central nervous system. Schizophrenia, strong link to retroviruses. All the inflammatory brain diseases they looked at, full of activity of retroviruses. MS, now that is a very, very tight link now for MS and retroviruses. Breast cancer, maybe not every case of breast cancer, but certainly the ones that I've seen in the last year, all were full of it. And then all the autoimmune diseases. And remember, I consider myself as one of the early world specialists on autoimmune disease. And we suspected when I did my thesis, this must be a virus or something like a virus. Retroviruses, that word didn't exist then, based on all the evidence we had. But I couldn't prove it then, but I followed the trail. And so diabetes type 1 is now really confirmed as a more recent study that just came out, suggesting insulin-dependent diabetes is a retroviral illness of the pancreas. You know, and then CCSVI, I'm not going to go deeply into some of the details. Rheumatoid arthritis is now a retroviral illness. You know. Sjogren's syndrome, lupus, very, very solid evidence. And then here's sort of the exciting new one. By the way, if you get the PowerPoint, if you're interested, I bolded the first article here because it's the most recent article on retroviruses that really says everything I'm saying here is in that article. Yeah, I just found that. And so if you want to review some of the more hardcore evidence. Chronic fatigue, very, very strong link to retroviruses. Non-Hodgkin lymphoma, I lost my wife to that, 10 years ago when I didn't know what I know now. I wished I did. Then many, many cancers are linked to it. And at the bottom, I just put autism there. There is an increasing strong link with autism. So take a deep breath. So it's basically all the cancers, all the neurological diseases, including chronic fatigue, all the shrinking brains that we have. Statistically, half of you in the room here will die with or of Alzheimer's disease. And knowing the deepest level of truth on that is a retroviral illness should get you interested. Well, how do you fix that thing? Because the wonderful thing is not difficult to fix. So why do our own endogenous retrovirus become active? I mentioned that aluminum, glyphosate, and the radiation that we're exposed to. There's also a link with Epstein-Barr. That Epstein-Barr on its own is actually not a bad guy, but most of the symptoms that you think is Epstein-Barr is actually because Epstein-Barr disables the mechanisms that we need to silence the retroviruses, and they cause all the symptoms you think are Epstein-Barr. So Epstein-Barr itself doesn't cause much. It was always around, but the retroviruses weren't, and the other factors, cofactors, weren't around. So retroviruses cause brain inflammation and elicit the cell danger response. I think I may have time to get into that a little bit. So many of you here in the room have inflamed brains or have a child with an inflamed brain, that you write off as a behaviorally difficult child, maybe obnoxious or hyperactive or dreamy or not attend in school or be fully autistic or seem retarded, whatever it is, all the kids have inflamed brains now. Some of them handle it better than others depending on other factors that are there. It's sad, I've been practicing medicine for 43 years, and to see the decline in the human condition in just that short time is painful. I often go home and cry, on my way home. It didn't used to be like that. I used to feel elevated, when I help somebody and somebody comes back and say, I'm better, it was that, but then you see another family destroyed by having an autistic child. It's like, and another vaccine story, and another vaccine story, and then I look in the literature, it's not reflecting that no vaccines definitely don't cause autism. Yeah, fuck you, It's like, telling me, well, what is this? Well, it's a foot, right? Everybody sees it. No, it's a hat. It's the glasses. No, vaccines don't cause autism. There's no question. Good. The cell danger response, that's an important part. You know, all at the bottom of all chronic illness or called chronic whatever condition is the so-called cell danger response. And I just want to take you through that because it's easy to understand. So when the cell in its interior milieu is threatened by something, like the incoming Wi-Fi that goes through every cell in the body, and the toxic metals that are deposited in your cell, because they're the antenna for the Wi-Fi on its own wouldn't do anything, any harm in us, but it's the metals in us that are like an antenna that absorb it, and the metals become metabolically active from it. Yeah? So there's a study that shows you when you have one amalgam filling, you put a cell phone to it and make a phone call for 2 minutes, it releases 40 times more mercury than it would release otherwise for the next few hours. So it's, you know, there is science behind it. It's not just some crazy German scientist speaking, even though that's also who you listen to. And so when the cell is threatened, either by toxins or by electromagnetic radiation, the cell thinks first, it's just me. I need to tell my brothers outside there that I'm under threat. So it sends a communication signal. And that's here on the left side. That's the excretion of ATP. ATP should be in the cell, turning on the different functions in the cell, providing it with energy. It should not be outside the cell. Some stupid colleagues of mine measure ATP in the blood, in the serum, and say, oh, your ATP level is low, we have to fix it. No, low is good. Yeah? If it's high, that's a communication signal of cells that are threatened to death. Yeah? And so the ATP gets outside the cell and then needs to be broken down. It's a set of enzymes that are called ectonucleotidases. So it breaks down to ADP, AMP, and then adenosine. And these breakdown products stimulate a receptor. There's a P2Y or P2X receptor. There's several of them. They're called the purine receptors. And the purine receptors, again, signal, these products are actually meant to stimulate these receptors in the neighboring cell, you know, to inform it, hey, there's trouble going on. But it also stimulates the own cell. And so it initiates an inflammatory response inside the cell. And so there is a vicious cycle going on that leads eventually to the death of the cell. And so the purine receptors here, we can desensitize them. There is a wonderful remedy, it's called suramine. That's an old worm remedy recommended by the World Health Organization as one of the 10 essential nutrients that every country should have. The moment that publication came out, it was delicensed in the US, next day when that came out as a recommendation. And so it's been curative for autistic kids. It's a beautiful study. It's from Navio, by injecting it every 6 weeks, you can virtually take any severely autistic kid and basically turn them neurotypical almost overnight. That's called suramine, just remember that one. So so this purinergic signaling, I just give you a short list of illnesses that it's involved with. This Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson, Huntington's disease, MS, ALS, degeneration, regeneration after brain injury, stroke, ischemia, inflammation, migraine, epilepsy, all the psychiatric disorders. My brother is a psychiatrist. I know a little bit about their thinking. Schizophrenia, bipolar, autism, addiction, sleep disorder, brain tumors. It's involved in everything, and by actually calming that thing down, it's phenomenal, what you can do with that. So these receptors are involved in learning, memory, locomotor, and feeding behavior, and sleep. Those of you who don't sleep, most likely it's the cell danger response that you're expressing that way. Those of you who realize you don't remember things anymore as well as you did once, you're in the cell danger response. You need to see what is causing it. Is it a toxin? You're still sleeping with Wi-Fi in the house, or your neighbors, or the cell phone tower next door. Let me see, I'm going the wrong way, I think. Yeah. So these are these enzymes that we can actually measure in people. Yeah, so it's the CD39 and CD73. That's for the physicians here. These are the two markers that can tell you, yes, you are in the cell danger response. You know, so it's a pretty easy way. All the AIDS doctors know how to order the lab work for those. I'm sorry, I'm going. Good. And then, yeah, there's more about the same. Here's the name Navio. You want to Google him. Yeah, if you want to know about suramine, that's the name. He's the guy who's doing the studies. And outside the US, I'm using it. I will never dare to use it here because I'm good friends with the FDA and other organizations that keep a close eye on me. So here's just one medication, suramine. Here is this, inhibits HIV or other retroviral replication, which is a wonderful tool. So in Austria, I consult with a company. We have a homeopathic company. It's called biopure.eu, and they have a low potency homocort of the suramine that works phenomenally well. It's called APT, anticholinergic therapy. Yeah, so it's biopure.eu, biopure.eu, where you can order. It's very inexpensive. You know, it's a few drops twice a day, do the job just perfectly. Yeah, and then the beautiful study he did, low-dose suramine in autism spectrum disorder. It's basically injected slow IV, 20 milligrams per kilogram of body weight of the child, and with radical, dramatic improvements. You know, those of you here with autism who don't know about it, that's one place to look that is worthwhile. Good, I'm going to skip forward. We're in the cannabis state here, so you know, any concoction, you know, with CBD and THC works as a antipurinergic, has antipurinergic effects against the cell danger response. That's why it's so wonderful for anxiety and for sleep. And it's just, you know, everybody has to find their own product that works for them. They're all different. You know, I'm personally allergic to some and do really well with others. But I think anyone here in the room who is not taking any CBD or THC is just stupid or missing the time. You know, it's like, yeah, it's just use it or lose it. You know, if you don't use it, you know, the government is standing by finding a reason to take it away. You know, and it's a little spring right now, but how long is it going to last? We don't know. By experience, you know, the moment the drug industry patents any compound that's similar, it's going to be gone. You know, and so use it and enjoy this time. You know, it was 60s and then it went away, and now it's this part of the century, but it's not going to last. You know, that's very predictable. I do know politics too well. So cannabis extracts, you know, for ASD. Judy Mikovits, again, is the world expert on how to treat autistic kids with different extracts and concoctions, 10-to-1 mix or 10-to-5 mix or 5-to-1 mix of the different ingredients. Diagnosing retroviral activity, pretty much we depend on this strange CD26 molecule, you know, that when it's high, the retroviral activity is low. When it's low, it's very high. So it's similar to CD57 and Lyme disease. You know, the CD26 is the one for retroviruses. And then the other one Bradstreet, you know, and Rogero developed this test. You know, Rogero was the original expert on HIV. And he realized that nagalase, it's a blood level test, nagalase, that we used to do a lot, is actually an indicator for retroviral activity. So it's that we can do here in the state. You know, nagalase is an inexpensive lab test. It's like $60 at LabCorp. But probably you know that many of the people actually daring to look at retroviruses were found with gunshots in their chest floating in rivers, like Jeff Bradstreet, who was a good friend here. And so I have to be a little bit careful, not to say too much. I do know a few other things that I'm not sharing with you guys. In Germany, we have a lab that does RANTES. RANTES is a wonderful inflammatory marker that goes up with retroviral activity and down with others. So since here's what RANTES all does, it's a marker for retroviruses, and so it's all the illnesses listed that you can monitor that way. And so chronic fatigue caused by retroviruses, that's an old story. So how do we treat it? So I'm just going to spend the last 7 minutes or so taking you through some of the things that you can do. So I went through what we know so far. As I mentioned before, there is no lab that you can use that directly tests it. Like an HIV, you can test in a lab, but it's the only retrovirus out of hundreds of them that are there. And it's a crime against humanity, that is unfolding right before our eyes. So the cautious use of glutathione. Glutathione is linked to slowing down retroviral activity in your system. You can use N-acetylcysteine as a proxy. The glutathione is like 3 amino acids strung together, and it's an important antioxidant. It's overrated because the naturopaths love injecting it because it never causes any side effects. Turns out most of glutathione in the US doesn't work. It's oxidized by the time you get it. And a totally different experience in Europe when you get it from Italy or from Germany, where it's to destroy glutathione, because it was very effective 10 years ago, it was wonderful. And then, several friends of mine published on glutathione, and what did the FDA do to silently kill it? They passed a law. Glutathione, when it's kind of made liquid, has to be kept with nitrogen, so there is no oxygen in the vial. And the FDA, simply to shut it down, forbids that process. There needs to be air in there. And that oxidizes it, and the whole thing of injecting reduced glutathione is gone. So just kind of know that. If you get regular glutathione shots, it's not what you think you're getting. So, but the real thing is beautiful. So giving N-acetylcysteine is usually the key element for your body to make its own. That's restricted. And so we mentioned it before with the sulfur-containing amino acids that Andriana so beautifully showed so quickly also that it went, it was like a storm. But NAC in moderate doses does increase your intracellular glutathione. There's more studies on retroviruses, and N-acetylcysteine alone is a good inhibitor of retroviral replication. Then a wonderful tool that how many of you here are, some of you look like you would be moms of autistic kids because you look stressed. So some of you were maybe around already 10 years ago when the time of OSR, Boyd Haley, the main mercury researcher, had created a beautiful glutathione analog that was very, very effective in crossing the blood-brain barrier and moving mercury and other toxins from the brain. It was a miracle for autism. Of course, the moment the FDA found out, they shut it down. And so now it's reinvigorated under the name Erminix. It's difficult to get. You need to have an IRB and kind of fill out a form for every patient, but we can get it. And it's a fantastic tool. And it stops retroviral replication. It's not just removing mercury, it's also an antiretroviral agent. Now, here's the big one. I wanted to almost spend the last few minutes with melatonin. Melatonin is completely misunderstood and underrated. Melatonin is the principal antioxidant used in the brain and in the central nervous system. It is not glutathione. It's not all the antioxidants that people talk about. It is melatonin. And melatonin is produced in every cell in the body, but in the brain, the predominant place is the pineal gland. But our whole gut microbiome, when it's healthy, produces about 400 to 4,000 times more melatonin than the brain does. but it does it at noontime. And so there is a German researcher who heals pretty much any neurological disease just with one tool, and that is melatonin. But this is not 2 or 3 milligrams. This is 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, up to 6,000 milligrams. But ALS, we give 6,000. With most the children get 80 milligrams. That's a working dose. Most adults need a lasting dose of about 300. It's the anti-aging tool for the older folks here. I notice that a few of you are over 60, which I'm always happy. I'm still one of the oldest here in the room, I think, so I can, and compared to the other speakers, I look a lot wiser because I lost my hair, What do these young whippersnappers know that still have hair? They haven't worried as much as I have, they don't. So we give it transdermally, that's the trick. We have a pharmacy in New York that makes it for us very inexpensively. Christine, what's the name of the pharmacy? Vita Health. By the way, if you need any questions over it, Christine is my office manager. She sits back there. She's hiding, but she knows more than I do. So I'm just working there. So the transdermal melatonin is given between dinner and bedtime, an hour or two before sleep time. Does hardly change your sleep. Most people don't feel any change initially. But what it does is phenomenal. Those of you know a little bit of biochemistry, the worst thing that happens in inflammation, in neurological illness, is the creation of peroxynitrite. The electrosmog, Marty Paul wrote this beautiful paper that shows the Wi-Fi exposure triggers an influx of calcium into your brain cells. And calcium triggers an inflammatory process in the cells that creates, ultimately at the end point, a substance called peroxynitrite, which completely destroys the cell. And melatonin is the antidote for peroxynitrite, but not in 2 or 3 milligrams. But if you give 200 or 300, you stop any neurological disease. That's a phenomenal tool. So this is just, you can combine it. So there is an article on melatonin and retroviral infection. They like to combine it with DHEA. It's also easy to get here. It's a phenomenal, simple treatment, inexpensive. There is a company we use a lot, Bulk Supplements. Those of you who don't know that, Google it. You find every supplement there that you ever needed. Like a kilo of melatonin costs like $200 or so. I mean, that's a year's supply or more for $200. It's fantastic. I can take you through some of the studies, but I highlighted here. So one, it's an anti-infectious agent, and so we use it for Lyme disease. It induces autophagy. That means that dead cells are eaten up in the body without having to fast, which I hate, fasting. It's fantastic for chronic gum disease. And here's the article on the melatonin delivery using transdermal ways of doing that. Then here, melatonin as an antioxidant under-promises but over-delivers. It is much more effective than any other antioxidant. And then it's a fantastic antiviral. And then, of course, what is long known is also fantastic as a anti-aging tool, to keep your brain fresh and intact. And then we have a lot of problems with people getting pregnant. Not in my office, like everybody else. Every month there's somebody else who gets pregnant because they know my tricks. But here's a beautiful one, the role of melatonin on production and preservation of gametes and embryos. It's a fantastic thing to get pregnant and stay pregnant. And then for the viral infections. And so what I left out here, well, the last one is interesting. A friend of ours, Steve Fry, who was a lab in Arizona. He's the only physician and lab technician in the world who uses actually a microscope and then does whatever he sees under the microscope, uses a DNA probe to see what it is actually that he sees. And he found over the last 10 years a huge increase in the strange phenomenon that we have all have a lawn basically covering every blood vessel on the inside and outside and every nerve sheet of fungi and plankton, plant material that grows, and this surface that's covered with this lawn of candida and other fungi and plants, algae and plankton is over 2 square miles in us. It's not a small surface. Yeah? And that he found is a direct correlation between the extent of that and chronic illness, the severity of chronic illness. And the only tool ever found to break that is not the antifungals, it's melatonin. Yeah? And so the article is here. It's a fantastic magic thing. And so last thing, I advise a company here, I have to admit that, in Seattle called BioPure. Website is biopureus.com. And so I researched all the literature on natural treatments for retroviruses. So a big one, really big one, is broccoli sprouts. They have to be exactly 2 inches long to cut, and then they have the right ingredients to give you a huge amount of retroviral activity. I'm going to skip. We have a cream at Sophia Nutrition. That is an antiretroviral cream. It's called Sophia Flow. It's fantastic. It's a bit on the expensive side. It's fantastic. We apply it to the anterior neck. There's many reasons. I'm not going to go into that because my time is theoretically up. Cistus tea. Now, cistus tea is a miracle. It comes from Sardinia. Again, we get it from BioPure. It's an absolute incredible tool. So it's effective for HIV. They actually did experiments on HIV patients that failed treatment with the triple or quadruple antiretroviral therapy that they've gotten. I gave them cistus tea, and all of them were cured. The question arose, okay, why not start with the tea and then try the drugs if the tea fails? Yeah, I mean, honestly. And so we put everyone on this tea, and the amazing thing, it's also anti-spirochetal. It's the strongest Lyme disease treatment. It's fantastic for fungi, for molds, for all the mold problems. And it's a biofilm breaker. That's all. And we like to combine it with a full whole leaf stevia extract. Makes it a potent Lyme disease treatment and retroviral treatment at the same time. And since we've introduced the work with the tea, I've seen more improvement with a single ingredient in my 43 years of practice than with any other intervention that we've ever tested. A tea, a stupid tea. A tea, I mean, I'm talking really about a tea. Yeah? Leaves, hot water, you boil it until it gets a certain color, and you drink the thing. Yeah? It tastes good, and people always say, well, where's the punishment? You want me to get better with something that tastes good? Yeah. So then I developed a powder. We don't have to go into details. It's an antiretroviral mixed with everything in it that's in the literature. And there's some simple things: St. John's wort, green tea, reishi mushroom, stinging nettle, olive leaf, bitter melon is a big one. And so BioPure here calls it NV, the same mix, N like endogenous retrovirus and V like viral. Yeah, so NV. And then vitamin B5 to silence the DNA of the viruses. That's a known old trick. And then luteolin is a plant antioxidant. It's a product for the autistic people here, the ones that take care of autistic kids. It's a product from Italy called Glialia. Fantastic. It's a combination of PEA and luteolin. It's an absolutely fantastic tool to disinflame the brain and has strong antiretroviral effects in the literature. Clonacava from BioPure is a brown algae that's been hugely effective in silencing these viruses. And licorice, stupid licorice, actually turns out to be a fantastic antiretroviral agent. We inject it, it's called glycyrrhizin, and that's the single most effective tool in people with chronic fatigue is the injection of licorice. And of course the FDA is shutting down one pharmacy after another that actually makes it, and so it's probably a limited joy. Okay, let me see okay, lots of articles on that. Selenium in high doses. Princess Diana published in a group that she had set up an article that the epidemic of AIDS could be completely stopped if everybody takes 800 micrograms of selenium a day. A week later, she was dead. Just to give you a taste of that field. Vagal stimulation is big. Pharmaceuticals, yes, have their place. We use them occasionally. My colleagues, the naturopaths in my office, all use Truvada and other retroviral drugs. I don't. I use the natural agents, and I do think I have better results with it. And then a new one on the block is the quinaquine, the old malaria remedies that work fantastically. But you can read that. If you get the PowerPoint, you can read that up. Here's the articles on suramine, and it's absolutely fantastic, for autistic kids. So that's it. So I almost stayed on time, not quite, but so thanks.